Tell me who you are and where we are.
So Tom, the rector of St Giles on the Fields, which is right here in the heart of the West End, in between. You've got Covent Garden down that way, and you've got Soho over there. And we occupy this sort of middle district. The place of St Giles has been undermined by the things around it. So everyone knows Bloomsbury, everyone knows Oxford Street, which is just there, everyone knows Centrepoint, which is just up there. Tottenham Court Road station is just there. But the idea of a district called St Giles, which always was here, has now been lost in time. Irritatingly, there was a move some time ago, turn of the last century, to call Tottenham Court Road station St Giles Circus.
Okay.
Apparently. That may just be a rumour. But it's interesting to think that if that had happened,
then this
the whole identity of the place would be
named
much
after
more
this church.
acute.
Yeah.
I think it was the Duke of Kent here at some point, and he sort of got out the car and said, "Oh, you're not in the fields anymore." I was like, "No, the joke has been made before." And people often get us confused with St Martin's in the Fields, which is apparently a church in Trafalgar Square.
I've heard of it.
I've heard of it.
Vaguely.
People always, when they say, "Well, where do you work?" I say, "Oh, I'm at St Giles in the Fields." I think, "Oh, wow, that's amazing." I'm like, "No, you're thinking of somewhere else." Two friends I was at Sandhurst with sent me a picture of them standing outside St Martin's the other day, because they still, having explained to them several times it's a different church, they still don't get it. I had a very irate woman ring up the other day because she was outside here wanting to go to a concert. She'd booked tickets to go to a concert, but there was no concert. I said, "No, it's because you're in the wrong church." Of course it was my fault, Vivaldi, so dull. Two things really. I think it's hidden in plain sight.
Yes.
It's the first thing. And the second thing is that something my former church warden said. He said that before there was London, there was St Giles. Been here, as I say, on this bit of land for a long time. St Gileses were always built, generally speaking, on the edge of cities. St Giles is the patron saint of lepers. So this was a leper hospital. Leper hospitals were generally built on the edge of cities or outside the walls. So you've got St Giles Cripplegate.
That's the one in the middle of Barbican.
It's in the Barbican, yeah.
Yeah.
Very nice. And then there's us. But as it happens, the district is named after this church, which has been here, not this building, but there has been a religious church site here since, we think, about 1107. I think we say 1101, 1100 something. Founded here as a sort of leper hospital. And the footprint of the churchyard is pretty much the same footprint of the enclosure of the previous hospital. So we've been here on this patch of ground for a very long time.
So the leper hospital was closed.
So that was sort of closed. I mean, they had lots of arguments about it and its ownership and all sorts of stuff, and patronage. There was royal patronage, and then there wasn't, and then there was again. But that was effectively fell foul of the active supremacy and the getting rid of the monasteries and the religious establishments. So then it became a parish church. But it had been functioning as a parish church before that.
Just remind me what St Giles did, apart from being nice to lepers.
I mean, there were lots of stories about St Giles. There were several vitas written about him. He became, like all sort of medieval saints, he had fluctuations in popularity. But essentially he lived as a hermit in southern France.
So he's not an English saint. Okay.
No, French. He lived in France anyway. All these stories about him being shot with an arrow and protecting deer and being fed with milk and all sorts of other things. How much of it is true, we don't know. But St Giles is generally regarded as being a holy man and a good egg. And there is something about, I think there's something special about being a St Giles church, particularly here.
Because they're relatively thin on the ground.
Well, they're relatively thin on the ground, but also they're often on the sort of margins and the edge. I prefer the word threshold. I just think that's such a lovely word, and I like a nice word. But they're sort of on the edge of things in many ways.
The rich guys are up there in Bloomsbury.
They are.
The bogs of Soho.
Soho was quite boggy. It was very boggy around here. But this whole St Giles Parish was sort of notorious and really poor. The rookeries, which were literally just across here, was some of the worst slums in London up until the sort of mid-1800s, when they began clearing them and put through New Oxford Street. So the parish used to go all the way over to sort of Lincoln's Inn Fields, but then in the 1700s, the great and the good of Bloomsbury decided that they wanted their own bit, so they got Hawksmoor to build St George's Bloomsbury. So the great and the good went there, and the poor and less glamorous came to St Giles.
The architect here,
Flitcroft, not very well known.
I mean, it looks like a Hawksmoor church.
Don't say that. I don't like Hawksmoor.
You don't like
I don't like
Hawksmoor?
Hawksmoor. There's something weird about him.
Oh, there's something weird about Hawksmoor,
I mean,
that's true. But
the
I think in
weird
a good
guy.
way.
Yeah.
Oh, he was?
I think
Yeah.
he would have been the weird guy at school.
You're not being influenced by the Ackroyd novels or anything like that, no.
I mean, I do love. Yeah, Peter Ackroyd writes very nicely about, well, interestingly,
His
about
weirdness, yeah.
his weirdness. And I like the way Peter Ackroyd actually said that, of St Giles, that it was the crossroads between time and eternity. I think that was in reference to the fact that people used to come here for what was known as the Rector's Bowl, or a drink before they were hung up at Tyburn, round the corner. Flitcroft was an interesting man, though. This still is his only church remaining, and he wasn't. He was sort of not a very well-known architect, but I think a very, very good one. St Giles is very unique in its
Yes.
sort of. It's Palladian, so its proportions are very particular.
Your hexagonal tower, I don't know anywhere else quite like that.
There is a church that has almost an identical tower, but I can't remember where it is or what it's called.
Okay.
But I know I have seen it, and I keep meaning to cycle to it.
I looked at the minutes of the 50 Churches Act meetings. That's what I do for fun now, and and this is not what you might call a core 50 Churches Act church, because it's a replacement.
There was an argument about whether they were going to do it or not.
Yes, and yeah, it's stone clad. You've got many of the quality features that you'd associate with the other 50 Churches Act churches.
Yeah.
You know, the rusticated quaint and lots of other detail that shows that it was. I mean, this is one of the things that it's very clear that they didn't really care whether they built 50. They cared that they built monuments to God. That was what was in their mind.
Was it?
And this, to me, clearly fits the bill. And if you see how the other churches that are kind of non-core were built, the replacement churches or the upgraded churches, there's an Act of Parliament and one paragraph in the minutes. There's much more about Giles. And yet it doesn't. I don't quite understand why it isn't in that list of 12. It would be the 13th.
There was a big argument between the vestry and the rector at the time and Parliament about who was going to pay for it. Because the existing church was here, it was really down to the parish to pay for it.
Yeah.
But St Giles was incredibly poor. And the previous church that had only been here for about 100 years was falling down, brick-built church. Because after the plague, the plague started in the parish of St Giles in a cloth box from a Huguenot.
Oh no, hang on. You're going to have to tell me.
So in St Giles, it said that the outbreak of the plague started over there.
I did not know
This
that.
was a very densely populated area, so it spread very, very quickly and then went into the city. So I've been told. Obviously, everyone was buried in their parish. This was the burial ground, and it was full very quickly. Thousands and thousands of people being buried. And without sounding too gross, like the juice from those who had been called to rest, being a brick church, effectively like soaked up into the church. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. There was a problem.
I mean, this is when they believed in miasma and the rest of it. Yes,
so there was a problem with damp. So the whole church took on a really unhelpful thing. And it was a shame because it was quite a beautifully decorated church by all accounts, and controversial. Archbishop Laud, who was in very many ways a sort of ritualist, brought back a bit of ritual into Anglican liturgy and colour and that sort of stuff. He was very involved in the church, and I think there were some statues in the church which caused enormous controversy because that was not considered to be a good thing to do. There's a woman called Alicia Duchess Dudley who had a really nasty husband who cheated on her, and then she divorced him, but took all his money, or she kept her money, either way, it was unusual for the time. Anyway, she gave it all to the church, to St Giles, and she paid for the rebuilding of the church, the previous church. And then she died and left all the money to the church still. So she's the patron. She still pays for the rector today.
Really?
Money, yeah. So Flitcroft, he was, by all accounts, an interesting man. He was quite hot-headed, I think, as a character. There's an apocryphal story, which I like to tell because it's almost certainly untrue. So he was having dinner with Lord Burlington, and Handel was there, and there was a very heated discussion, and it didn't quite come to blows. That would be unfair for me to say that, but in my imagination, Henry Flitcroft punched Lord Burlington, and Handel therefore refused to play at the opening of St Giles. All of these things are not true, I think. But it is a story that has endured, and it's a story I particularly like, that our architect punched Lord Burlington, and it disgusted Handel so much he refused to play.
The churchyard's been cleared?
I mean, there are still lots of bodies.
There's still bodies?
There's still bodies, but it is, yeah, there are no stones.
It's not one, yeah, okay. I
mean,
the bodies weren't moved, it was just the stones.
A lot of bodies were moved, but there are thousands and thousands and thousands of bodies. You know,
Well, what's the criteria then for moving and not moving?
So they did a big clearance in the 1800s, and our graveyard moved to be where St Pancras Station is, and then they built the station over it. So the dead of St Giles haven't had an easy time. They've been moved around a bit, and now the train line goes through, and they were moved again elsewhere.
But it's a very pleasant public space. It's quite a pleasant public space for where we are. Think about where we are, and you've got the Phoenix Garden next door, which I didn't know about.
The Phoenix Garden is beautiful, yeah.
Yeah.
It could do with some significant public investment,
Okay.
which we're working on at the moment.
Like I said, we've got the Exodus, and what's chapter 10? Is that?
Chapter 20.
Chapter 20.
The commandments. In Elizabethan England, it was compulsory to have the commandments and the creed and the Lord's Prayer.
But these are quite highly decorated. You often see them
much more
highly
decorated, yeah.
Spartan than this.
The pelican is unusual. The pelican is a symbol of piety. The medieval myth of the pelican was that the pelican fed its young with by pecking its breast, and as Christ feeds his flock, the church.
But these panels, do they date from the?
They are contemporary with the church, yeah. I mean, everyone gets very excited about Gwenlyn Gibbons as you know, someone who wood carver.
Yes.
I think St James's Piccadilly has got some very nice stuff there. This is not. St Giles was built on a budget. I think St George's.
They couldn't afford.
Well, they couldn't afford it,
Yes.
and I'm not sure it was actually the right time. He was a bit before,
Yeah.
I think. But for example, St George's Bloomsbury was like £20,000 to build. Hawksmoor was expensive. St Giles, because Parliament were paying for it, I think it cost £7,000 to have the church built, which was nothing in comparison. And we borrowed a lot of stuff from the old church. So the pulpit is from the previous church, so that's older than the building. Yeah.
There's some fine detail on that.
Really fine detail, especially like here. I think it's beautiful. Really beautiful. So the pulpit and the organ, in fact, were from the previous church.
So is the organ in good repair?
Excellent.
Really?
Yeah, it was fully restored about 15 years ago. A lot of organs in London or a lot of organs all over the place were heavily restored or altered by the Victorians. Again, because St Giles was such a poor parish, we had no money, so we were sort of saved.
Saved by poverty. That's
saved by
unusual.
poverty, yeah.
So
we've got Moses and Aaron here. It's unusual because Moses has got these horns. So
so I've seen the horns before.
Yes, the famous mistranslation. Moses came down the mountain, his face shone, but actually it was mistranslated as he had horns or something. You often get Moses with these horns. But I think they were designed, these pictures, these paintings, they were designed to go higher up because they look a bit like dwarves. If you look at them.
Yes, they look like they should be.
If they were higher up, they would look
taller.
The proportions would work, but they don't.
And
the window, I actually really, I've said this publicly in sermons, so I can quite happily say it here. I just dislike the window a lot.
Okay, right, let's see if there's something to like about it. Let's see if you're wrong about this.
Well, let me just say why. I mean, so
Yeah.
the whole church was full of stained glass that was blown out during a bomb in the Second World War, except the east window, which managed to survive. And I think the reason I dislike it, it's the transfiguration.
Yeah. Yeah, he's not really glowing, actually. Isn't he supposed to be glowing?
There's that, but he's also got this sort of like poodle-like hair. He's got these sort of big floppy, he looks like a spaniel, looks like a cocker spaniel with his hair. I don't have a problem with Moses and Elijah particularly, but the disciples irritate me because they're all old. You know, and the disciples probably would have been, you know, in their 20s and 30s, and they're old. And I think it vexes me particularly because the congregation here is quite young. And, you know, I've got people in their 20s and 30s who are trying to follow God, and I just think that's an exciting thing. And it was an exciting thing, but rather we've got this sort of quite serene, quite sort of, I don't know, lacks enthusiasm or excitement as an event.
Even John looks ancient.
Yeah.
I mean, John's supposed to...
I get it, because, you know, it was about wisdom and, you know, all that sort of stuff. But
but Jesus doesn't look... Jesus looks...
He looks about right,
like
the right
Thor.
age, yeah. It's terrible. I mean, it's just dreadful. But... And I don't really like this. I don't really like the sort of fat cherub in the middle of the commandment board either.
You're happy with the pelican?
I like the pelican, and I like the board, and I like the grapes, but I don't like the cherub.
I like the gold, which I think there's a thing that Anglican churches do very well, which is they often treat gold. You know, it's so easy to kind of bling this up and make it like Trumpian, but this is.
There is a lot of gold. There is actually a lot of gold in here.
Yes, and the ceiling, I'm guessing, is original.
Yeah, the ceiling is really quite beautiful. Actually, I think the plasterwork is very delicate, and very nice.
There's a connection with the church and the plot
Pendrell.
against.
Yeah, Pendrell. Yeah, so he's buried in the churchyard here. So he essentially hid the king up an oak tree when he was running away from those who were trying to take his life. He was a Catholic, actually, Pendrell, but he was remembered for sort of his role in helping to save the king.
That's Charles.
That's where we get sort of Oak Apple Day from, which we don't really celebrate anymore in England, but we should. It's where you'd show your loyalty to the crown by wearing a sprig of oak. You do it here, and if you didn't do it, you'd get either whipped with nettles or have your bottom pinched, I think.
Okay.
Which is a safeguarding issue, so that's not going to happen. But
I think technically Charles I is a saint as a martyr.
Yeah, I mean...
How does that sit? No?
Next question.
Yeah, okay.
Come and see the tomb. So this is the Pendrell's tomb. Richard Pendrell, preserver and conductor to His Majesty King Charles II after his escape. But I'm not entirely sure why he ended up being buried here. There's all sorts of theories. There were quite a lot of Catholics buried in the churchyard here at St Giles.
Yes.
So whether the rectors or the general population were more tolerant of that, I'm not sure.
So I was actually thinking of another one where there's the letter from Mary Queen of Scots that the spies picked up.
So this was to Oliver Plunkett and co, who were killed for their Catholicism and then buried in the churchyard. There was a gallows on the corner here, which is why I think Ackroyd described it so aptly as crossroads between time and eternity. It really was a crossroads out of London. People were hung here in the churchyard on the corner of the churchyard, and then also up at Tyburn.
Is this the same as the one outside?
Yeah, this is the original that was moved in here, and the one outside is a copy. This is the final judgment. It would have been beautifully painted at one point, we think. You can still see a bit of colour on there. So then you've got the dead being raised here. Yeah. I think you've got Satan here.
Do you know what these two in the corner?
I can't really.
I'm trying to see. I guess, look, there's flames here. Look, so I guess this is the punishment side.
You always have heaven one side and hell the other. I mean, this is older than the church. I'm sure that there was a date on it somewhere. Oh, yes, 1687.
It has that vigour, doesn't it?
I think it's also in the wrong place. I think because the resurrection gates used to be out there,
Yes.
facing onto the high street. You know, so people marching by, and then they were moved in the 1800s around the side when this was brought in here, I think. But I think we're missing a trick with it because it's actually a really
as soon as you see
powerful
it,
piece.
you can't look away. There's so many monuments, and actually really rather nice monuments on the wall.
Yeah, I did start looking up. I mean, because obviously, like, you know, you read up some of this stuff, like.
Yeah, there's always going to be a lot of empire and West Indies and slavery.
There is. I'll show you my favourite one when we go up the tower, actually.
Oh, okay.
This was one of the memorials I particularly love.
Yeah.
She cared for this church with her own hands. The history of the parish, you know, has been written about a lot by Gordon Taylor, who was the rector here from 1949 until 2000. But when he took over, you know, the population of the parish was about 20,000 people. It's now about 2.5. You know, and in his time there was a huge decline in population, and that's where we are now. So, very, very underpopulated part of a very busy bit of London. We have a situation where there are too many schools, too many school places, and we just in the past decade have hemorrhaged families from the west end of London. You know, a school that was at a roll of 174 a few years ago is now at 100. You know, you can't do that financially, and it is becoming a problem. And because you get to a critical point,
suddenly you're a small village.
You know,
in the middle of London.
Our school closed in 1963, and is now the St Mungo's homeless shelter.
And this is nice. Lovely. So you've got a nice view up here.
Yeah, it's great. I remember saying this in my last parish. We had a really nice ring of bells that were all cast in 1664. And it was the idea that if someone came back from the past and was sort of wandering around the churchyard, it would be recognisable to them as a sound. And I think the history of sound, particularly with bells, is something we forget. We think about the history of things in terms of visible, you know, tangible stuff. Whereas actually the history of sound, I think, is quite a nice thing.
Can we go up higher?
We can.
Always just keep on asking until the moment where someone says, no, you can't go any further.
Well, you'll run upstairs.
Ringing change. Oh, that's the end, yeah. Here we go. This is where you start feeling the age of the building. You see untouched bits. Do you want to go up more?
Yeah, you can do. Yeah, so this is the roof.
It's actually got a very shallow pitch.
It has, hasn't it? Yeah.
Does it leak?
No.
Up or down?
Up to you. You can carry on up if you like. It'll be quite steep.
Do you know what this is?
That's the pendulum for the clock, which is unfortunately at the moment not working. No, it's just about to be restored. Big old pendulum.
You wonder who in the past was injured that they put this big thing around it. But that's going to have a lot of momentum to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would give you a headache if you ran into it. That's for sure.
So if we go up, can we see the clock?
It's quite the next bit's. Yeah, you can stick. You can go up that bit. I'm going to stick down here.
Okay.
It's quite.
It feels
rustic.
yes, but it's actually more solidly built than some of the ones I have been at. And you've got 1, 2. Have you got 4 clock faces?
Yeah.
So is it all right if I go up there?
Yeah, by all means.
Ah, fantastic. Fantastic. So in case it's not obvious, I'm about here when I'm taking these shots. Although the day I took this shot was obviously vastly sunnier. I wish I could show you the view, but I can't really. The netting just really gets in the way. However, if you look up directly above my head, I think you can see roughly where a new bell is going to be put relatively shortly. And you can see that the ladders continue up and then continue up again. You can't see it in this shot, but I think you can see it in this shot. I decided not to go that far. However, I feel that if I ever got enough subscribers, I'd be motivated to just keep on climbing. So do share, comment, subscribe, and come back next week. We've got some more with Rev'd Tom.